Howdy folks, Tex Grebner here with Tex Grebner Outdoors. Illinois archery season for whitetail is opening in days. So I drug a 3D deer out to my deer stand here that I plan on hunting opening day. And I'm going to check my sights. Yeah, you like that? Opening day for whitetail in Illinois is October 1st. So first of all, I'm going to take you around and show you the back of the target. Forward to center, baby. Luckily, I didn't break any nocks, but I always cringe when these expensive arrows clatter together. Hopefully, it's a good sign. Deer season's hours away. It's down to where you can measure it in hours. Illinois archery season 2016. Here I am sitting in a grain cart tractor with a whole lot of nothing to do in between soybean loads, but think about deer season. Hope, pray, plot, scheme. Basically sweat the small stuff. Growing up as a kid, I always wanted to have my own outdoor show. YouTube came along, started making videos. I'd like to think I'm pretty alright at it. But I don't really enjoy hunting deer, because I don't have ideal circumstances. Nothing that I do ever turns out quite like how I want it to. And so I'm just going to be honest with you. A lot of people talk about hunters have something to prove. At this point, yeah, I do have something to prove. Because I'm Tex Grebner of Tex Grebner Outdoors, and I'm being completely candid and honest with you. There is a high likelihood that I ain't going to get shit. Because I never get shit. There's also a high likelihood that if I do manage to get a deer within range of my recurve, and I do manage to kill it, I'm probably going to cry. just that simple. But there's a high likelihood that over the course of this deer season documentary, you're going to get to watch me slowly descend into madness, be foiled at every turn, and slowly over the course of this season slip into a ghastly melancholy, as Edgar Allan Poe would say. But opening day is literally hours away. And every year I fool myself into thinking that opening day is a brand new beginning. Ain't nothing ever works right. Ain't nothing ever goes as planned. And I deal in reality. If it happens, you're gonna see it, you're gonna hear it, and I'm gonna tell you a hunting story. But I don't have ideal circumstances. I work with what I have within the parameters of what I'm able to do. Now, I'm a hell of a showman, don't get me wrong. I can MacGyver some shit right out. But the hell of it is, I don't really like deer hunting. Because deer hunting to me represents nothing but failure. And I'm hoping over the course of this season that I may be able to prove that I'm not the shittiest hunter in the world. I don't know if any of you have ever seen Escanaba in the Moonlight, but it's kind of like that, except for without that whole heartwarming ending. I hunt whitetail because I'm too broke to go somewhere and hunt something else. And I hunt whitetail under less than ideal circumstances. I can't make the deer show up. In Illinois, I'm not allowed to put out salt, I'm not allowed to bait, but all we can do is food plot. And I also don't have access to a whole shitload of fucking acres. That's just the way it is. But I know that I could probably kill a whole mess of deer if I didn't bring the camera along. But you can't have a hunting show if you don't film your hunts. So deer season is only hours away, and here I am sitting in the grain cart while we're combining soybeans, and I'm hoping and I'm praying and I'm plotting and I'm scheming and trying to convince myself that this deer season ain't gonna be as shitty as all the other ones. Don't get me wrong, I have fun while I'm doing it, but I sure would like to get a good buck at some point. I was in my stand well before first light, and the best time in an entire year is the darkness just before sunrise, opening day of deer season. Because in the darkness, your mind can create a phantasmagoria filled with giant bucks. But as the sun comes up, it burns away the phantasmagoria and creates a cruel, unforgiving reality. Sitting in my stand at first light, I was incredibly excited. Every day of hunting is exactly the same, but every day of hunting is just a little bit different. It was the perfect weather. Cold, coolish, misty rain, overcast. I had encountered one hurdle. This was a brand new property that I had had to cross a creek to get to. I was using a climbing stand only 10 feet off the ground, and I had dumped my rangefinder out of my pocket crossing the creek. I hadn't necessarily planned to hunt this, but opening day is a brand new beginning. Everything was perfect, but around noon, having no activity, I managed to go to Menards, get some climbing sticks, and put up a proper stand at this little teardrop of timber that was edged by a soybean field with a well-used deer path along it. The perfect funnel. I would compare myself to a dog quite often. I have a bow hunting obsession. I like sticks. I like hit with sticks. I like to throw sticks. It's all about the sticks, kind of like a dog. And I would like nothing better than to kill animals with sticks. But as the magic hour approached, fidgeting like a puppy in my deer stand, trying to hold as still as I possibly could, hoping against hope, I sat, watching, waiting, listening. People talk about wanting to prove something. And as the sun sank lower and lower on this opening day, I wanted to not prove that I was better than my quarry, but to prove myself against my ancestors.
And let the slow descent into madness begin. That's the end of opening day. I mean, to be honest with you, other than dumping my rangefinder in the creek, it was a pretty good day. Traded out from my climbing stand to my hang-on stand midday. Didn't see nothing, but then again, I didn't get busted by nothing either. Kind of struck off into the unknown with this brand new little patch of timber. It ain't nothing to it. But I figure they'll head there when arrows start flying. So stay tuned. Season ain't over yet, and I'm still hopeful.
To my everlasting shame, I confess, I slept in on a Sunday morning. And so I was hunting an early autumn afternoon that was pleasantly warm, sitting, watching, waiting, listening, trying not to fidget, and loathing the fact that I had forgotten to wear my knee boots to hunt this stand that I had planned on hunting opening day, because I had crossed the creek and gotten my boots wet. Not nearly as important to not get your feet wet in the early autumn as it is in the winter, but still it was slightly annoying. Occasionally I would hear an Osage orange drop from a tree outside my clearing, and I would snatch my bow into my hand, filled with excitement, only to be disappointed. Luckily, with it being warm for the most part, I did not have to deal with the rustling of the squirrels in downed leaves, which I knew would come later in the season. Every day of hunting is exactly the same, but every day of hunting is just a little bit different, and I was filled with primal excitement every time that a frog or fish would jump in the creek. Hearing the splash, I would assume that a deer was crossing. Of course, it was nothing, but your mind can create an excellent phantasmagoria when you desire something very much. And so, still attempting not to fidget and enjoying the early autumn afternoon, it became cooler and cooler as the evening continued. With most of the crops still in, there was very little to induce the deer into moving. However, there's always a chance. And so as night came on quicker and quicker, I became incredibly excited, knowing if something was to happen, it would happen soon.
Tried the stand that I was planning on hunting opening day before I changed my plans. Didn't see anything. But the crops are pretty much still in. The harvest is just barely getting started. So they're pretty hard to see when they're out in the cornfields. And there isn't really a good reason for them to move. But I'm only 2 days into the season, so I've still got a little bit of hope. Maybe this year I'll break my whitetail curse. I can't chase the North American 29 if I don't get species number 1.
I made my way across the creek into my stand, being careful not to bust anything out. The wind was good. Every day of hunting is exactly the same, but every day of hunting is just a little bit different. Barely had I got into my stand with the magic hour in full commencement. As I looked out into the corn, I saw deer everywhere, frolicking, simply out of range. But nevertheless, I had my bow in my hand, ready. As you could clearly see, even if you cannot spot the deer, they do have a highway cut through this farmer's cornfield. This is a stand that I spent much of my time in last season. However, this season, I had acquired permission to hunt the field, and I had repositioned my stand. I hoped upon hoped that one would make it to the field edge where they had the corn tromped down extremely badly. But I continued to watch the dark shapes as the magic hour continued. Bucks up on the ridge across the field, does down in the field. I was surrounded by deer, simply out of range, but still hopeful because the wind was good. But I did not fancy, quite honestly, the fact of needing to track a deer through the corn in the evening, and so I was not entirely disappointed that I did not have a shot opportunity presented to me. Truthfully, I don't have a clue what I would do if something actually went right for a change.
Well, seen some deer tonight. Didn't get a shot, but oh well. Slow descent into madness continues. So I hope you guys will stay with me. Once that corn comes out, my luck should improve. But life ain't like the pornos. Hunting ain't like the TV shows.
I hadn't even really planned on going hunting tonight, but I had the chance after I got out of the field with the auger wagon helping get the harvest in, so I slapped the Savage paint on and headed to the cornfield stand again. You never really know what's going to happen when you're hunting, so you just kind of got to be there. It was a beautiful, warm, but yet early fall night. Everything was absolutely perfect. All that it needed was a deer to come prancing through a couple of rows of corn from me, and it would have been just absolutely perfect. Now you see, there's a lot of things that go through my head while I'm hunting, because hunting with a traditional bow presents its own set of challenges. Hunting on film presents its own set of challenges. And of course, hunting on film, traditional bow hunting, and solo filming, trying to get a deer inside my effective range. God forbid I miss. God help me if I wound an animal. I would be very upset about that. You don't want to be putting bad karma out there. So there's an incredible amount of stress and strain and emotional attachment that goes into my deer season. Sitting, watching, waiting, listening, trying to sit as still as I can, which quite frankly, I'm terrible at sitting still. Occasionally a squirrel would run up a corn stalk and make me have a heart attack. But the magic hour was here, accompanied, in fact, by no deer at all. As the sun sank lower and lower, I knew yet again that it was now or never, because I do not look forward to the aspect of hunting next to tall corn and potentially losing an animal. But as the chill came on, I finally decided that it was time to climb down.
Couldn't have asked for a better night for deer hunting in the early season. Didn't have very long to hunt, but I'm just glad I came out so that I could experience it. Whitetail deer are beautiful, majestic, free-spirited creatures, and you never really know what they're gonna do. For those of you wondering why I'm always straggling into the woods, just into the magic hour, I live in real life. I hunt when I have the chance.
You may be wondering why I do what I do, and to be quite honest with you, every time I go hunting I question it. The easiest answer is that I'm on a quest for a whitetail deer, on nobody's terms but my own. I want to tell you a hunting story, but the sad reality of hunting is the quarry often gets away. For thousands upon thousands of years, four-legged critters have evolved, evading mankind. But why do I hunt in general? I bring the camera along to carry on the time-honored tradition of the hunting story. But hunting is an act of nature worship. Hunting, to me, has always been very religious. Not only spiritual, but very religious. Hunting is an act of nature worship. And when you achieve a kill, it is animal sacrifice, plain and simple. Another reason why I equate hunting to religion is because to worship something, you want to please it, you want to draw it nearer to it, and get things from it that you need or desire. I am on a quest. I am chasing a dream. Hunting is religion, and according to my American ideals, you have no right to tell me how I should practice the religion that I choose to practice. One thing that I particularly dislike in the outdoor industry is this perception that hunting is effortless, based off of what people see on television. There is a concept, the moment of truth, when life and death hang in the balance. I live for that moment of truth, but hours and hours of waiting, thousands of tiny details, feathers on a scale to balance a brick, all go into one moment of truth when life and death hang in the balance. And quite honestly, with as many things need to line up in order for me to harvest a deer on film and tell you a hunting story, quite frankly, truthfully, and honestly, I have been waiting and working so long that I don't know what I would do. I have no idea how I would react or what to even think if just once everything went right.
You know, venison might be delicious, but I'm not gonna feed you some line of bullshit about how, oh, you gotta fill the freezer. Screw that. It's so much more than that. It's a holistic communion with nature. But I need to make me some big medicine with a big whitetail. So stay tuned. I didn't really expect to see anything tonight, but it was a gift from God all the same to be able to get into the tree stand.
I had an idea that was just crazy enough to work. I was going to walk through the cornfield to the opposite side where I always saw the bucks and does coming out into the field at night. I had a lawn chair strapped to my backpack, and after making it across the field, I found that, as to be expected, the hillside was absolutely cut with deer trails into the grass. It was an early October, somewhat muggy evening. The magic hour was approaching, and I was facing a trail at the top of the hill. I had a thorn tree at my back, and I had just cut into my supper apple. Everything was absolutely perfect. However, when I stood up to take a piss, no sooner had I stood up than I caught movement over my right shoulder. I froze and touched my wrist remote. There was a doe standing just out of view on the other side of the thorn tree behind me. Moments dragged into minutes as she watched me. I had taken the precaution of coating my Cryptek vest with Evercalm from Conquest Scents. I target glanced my bow and then checked over my shoulder. She was distracted. My heart was in my throat. Everything had gone absolutely perfectly, except for I had faced the wrong trail. Slowly I turned, ready to draw. She was no more than 5 yards away, and as I drew my bow for the perfect quartering away shot, the movement made her see a man, her primal enemy. But I had made big medicine for this, and I was astounded at how close I had come. I remained as motionless as I could, and the doe, surprised, went back to her everyday activities. However, I did not fancy a shot through the honey locust brambles with where she was, and so I made an attempt to skirt around the tree and get a more clear shot opportunity. As if she was teasing me, the doe would bob her head down to feed and then check on the foolish hunter whom she had snuck up on. Sweating bullets, my heart in my throat, I watched as the doe finally fed down into the cornfield. I was astounded at my close encounter and my luck. Sometimes, even if everything goes right, things are just crazy enough to work, and I will make a way of screwing it up. She was absolutely on the other side of the thorn tree, and I had simply been facing the wrong way. Every day of hunting is exactly the same, but every day of hunting is just a little bit different.
No time for savage paint tonight. It's a real long chance, but damn it, I'm going hunting. Only got about an hour worth of shooting light.
There was an autumn chill in the air, and I had noticed the leaves turning from green to different beautiful shades. I didn't have very much daylight, and I wasn't entirely hopeful, and I was somewhat disappointed that I hadn't had the time to put on my face paint. Does face paint really do anything? Not really. Does it make you feel better? Does it enhance the primal sensation of the hunt? I believe it does. I'm not particularly good at deer hunting, but I am very good at making it weird. When in doubt, always make it weird. Sitting, watching, waiting, listening. Every day of hunting is exactly the same, but every day of hunting is just a little bit different. And you can't know what you could see until you have seen it. So you have to be there. The chill of autumn was in the air, even more pronounced as the sun dropped, so did the temperature further. And while I have a hard time sitting still, it became even harder with the chill in the air. There was a rabbit down in my food plot, but his season does not open until November, and so he was safe. Or she was safe. But as the sun sank lower and lower, the wind remained in my face. But yet no deer came across the alfalfa pasture to visit my stand. But I did not regret that I had hunted.
Well, sex ain't like the pornos, hunting ain't like the TV shows. I bring you the reality of a deer season.
The cold, wet fall morning had come with a vengeance. It was just above freezing, and this trouble was compounded by the fact that I discovered the creek had swollen to my waist. And so with soaking wet boots and soaking wet wool pants, I made my way the rest of the way into the stand in the darkness and got my camera set up. Watching in the darkness, waiting, peering into the unknown, envisioning bucks and does prancing past my trail on the funnel that was created by the creek and the timberline in front of me. Everything was absolutely perfect. And while I was chilled to the bones from being wet, the wool at least helped and preserved my spirit. But yet, very rarely, when the sun burns away the phantasmagoria in the dark, do you ever find a deer prancing down your trail, giving you a perfect broadside shot. But my favorite time is the darkness just before dawn, when anything is possible, before life is revealed in its cruel reality. Wherever they are known, the white-tailed deer is given mystical properties because of its stealth, its beauty, and its grace. Everything was so absolutely perfect in the chilly mist of this fall morning. So absolutely perfect as I tried to shiver myself warm. The sun was rising slowly, but yet I had seen deer on my trail camera just beyond my stand. The creek at my back, the timber line along the fence at my front, creating a perfect funnel toward their bedding area. Watching, waiting, listening, shivering, filled with excitement for the unknown, but yet slightly disappointed. Anticipating, waiting, simply loving the misery that goes along with the visceral experience of being in the outdoors. The sun climbed even higher, and I was forced to peel myself away from my tree stand and cross the creek yet again to go back to my real life.
And the slow descent into madness continues. Couldn't have asked for a better morning. Well, I guess. Could have got a deer. Now it is pleasant to hunt something you want very much over a long period of time, being outwitted, outmaneuvered, and failing at the end of each day. But having the hunt and knowing each time you are out, sooner or later your luck will change, and you will get the chance that you have been seeking. But it is not pleasant to have a time limit by which you must get your kudu, perhaps never get it, nor even see one. It is not the way hunting should be. The way to hunt is as long as you live, against as long as there is such and such an animal, just as the way to paint is as long as there is you and colors and canvas, and to write as long as you live, as long as there is pen, pencil, paper, any machine to do it with, and anything you care to write about. And you feel a fool, and you are a fool to do it any other way. Ernest Hemingway, Green Hills of Africa. The season was still young, and I had the hunt. And so, sitting in the rain, I made up my mind that I was going to hunt. Every day of hunting is exactly the same, but every day of hunting is just a little bit different. The same primal emotions of our ancestors coursing in our veins as our hearts pound. But every day of hunting is just a little bit different. Different sights, different sounds, even different smells. I often compare myself to Hemingway in his quest to get a kudu. I sat, the season still young, shivering from the rain, watching, waiting, listening, hoping and praying, and knowing that with it being such a long rain, that something would happen. And then, after hours and hours of waiting patiently, a buck came striding out of the corn as if he was a fever dream. Antlers on his head, tall and regal. My shivers went away. A primal surge washed over me. It was now time for action. Moving slowly off my camp stool, I made my way up the hill. He was distracted and feeding on the wet grass. At 20 yards, I knew that I could kill him, but I did not let my arrow fly. I moved a bit closer, and he looked right through me. But there was no perceived danger for him. I was upwind. He occasionally checked over his shoulder. I probably should have loosed an arrow while his head was down, but I still wanted to close the distance. I was inside of 20 yards from a whitetail, but I moved carelessly and broke a stick, and he bounded all the distance that I had covered, and then bounded off, absolutely exhilarated with the primal surge that had come from my heart and my bones. I made my way back to my camp stool beneath the honey locust tree, shivering again and wondering, should I have shot, knowing that I could have killed him, but yet wanting to close the distance. He had not winded me, and the fusion camo had done its job. I was happy, and yet disappointed. But the way to hunt is as long as there is you, and there is such and such an animal. And as the night came down, I made my way out of the cornfield again.
When all the world has gone to sleep, the hunters to the forest creep. From out the wildwood comes the call, the hunt is life, the hunt is all. An ancient forest beckons me to run sky-clad amongst the trees. My lusty spirit cannot wait the gentle deer to penetrate. Cernunnos, lord of beasts, he grunts, come join us for the wild hunt. In the Celtic zodiac, my birthstone is Cernunnos, the stag-faced savage god of the wild and of the hunt. And so that poem has a very special significance for me in my personal medicine and mythos. And in the darkness, anything is possible before dawn, where every swaying weed, as the sky begins to turn gray, creates a deer in the phantasmagoria in your imagination, in your mind's eye. Everything is perfect before the sun, before cruel reality. The ancient dance of predator and prey. Every day of hunting is exactly the same, but every day of hunting is just a little bit different. I had hung this stand by the light of an almost full moon only hours before. Leave me a note in the comments if you think that it is pretty badass that I can hang a stand by moonlight alone when I have forgotten my flashlight in my Jeep. Sitting, watching, waiting, listening. This stand was hung right over where the buck had been earlier in my season. I have come to realize over my years of deer hunting, if you hear it, it is a squirrel. If you do not hear it, it is a deer. They possess stealth that we could only dream of. Majesty, grace, the majestic, elusive whitetail. It was a humid October morning, unseasonably warm, as I sat watching, waiting, listening, hoping, praying, ruminating and reflecting on my decision to try and get within 5 yards of that buck. Some guys brag how far they can kill with a bow. But I had envisioned on my stalk the triumphant glory of practically touching the deer before I was detected. And with plenty of time to ruminate on this fact, I sat. The wind very poor, but yet I was coated down with evercalm. I have honestly never had much luck on the morning hunts. I think that the morning hunt is exciting because walking in the darkness, anything is possible before dawn. But yet, my hunt was coming to a close as the harvest season was in full swing, and I would soon be pulled away from my wild solitude, playing a life and death game of chess with the skills of checkers.
And because I live in reality, I've got to go do other shit. And so we again enter into the visceral mystery that is the ancient sacrament of the hunt.
A hawk circled overhead, catching a snake that was sunning itself on the grass. Geese flew overhead as well, headed south, and other birds flitted through the leaves around me. One thing that I am absolutely atrocious at is sitting still. It's like a puppy waiting for a treat. I want to kill shit with sticks. I'm like a dog like that. It's all about the sticks. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I am not very patient. I am not good at all at sitting still. Combine a dog-like sense of energy with attention deficit, and it is an exercise of pure will to attempt to sit still. It was a hot afternoon. I didn't expect a whole lot of movement, but the ambush was absolutely perfect as the magic hour drew nearer and nearer. The leaves still on the trees would shield me. I hoped that a deer would pass along the trail to my right side, into the opening, and give me a distracted broadside shot at little more than 5 yards. Everything was absolutely perfect. I had seen that buck take the very same trail, which is why I had put up this stand by moonlight. The magic hour was rapidly approaching. The sun was sinking. Everything was so perfect. I was coated down with evercalm as again, but yet the wind was not very good. I felt like I was somewhat overhunting this hillside, but yet, hopefully, if the deer had changed their pattern, I would have driven them into my other property across the field. I heard rustling behind me, but of course, If you can hear it, it's a squirrel. The magic hour was upon me. The temperature slowly began to drop little by little out of the 80s. If something was going to happen, I knew that it was going to happen soon. And all hunters have this dilemma of the magic hour. We want a deer to show up, but we also want to make sure that we have enough light to track by. Sitting, watching, waiting, listening. Every day of hunting is exactly the same, but every day of hunting is just a little bit different. The wind-tossed weeds on the hillside in the shadows as they lengthened caused my heart to race. Every rustle of a corn leaf made me think that it was the buck back again. But yet, as the night came down to wrap the dark embrace around my little patch of woods, I realized it was going to be yet another empty hunt.
And the slow descent into madness continues. You know it's well and truly deer season when you go to wipe your nose with your sleeve and it's full of burdock and briar. That really hurts. Nothing tonight. Season's still young. A little too warm, I think. But deer are wild and free, majestic creatures. And I may just get another chance at that buck. This is extremely foolish. But I'm going to see how close I can walk up on this doe. Nothing like getting into the woods late. Wind is good. 'Cause either way, I gotta get to my stand. That was pretty darn close.
I knew that there would be action tonight. Sadly, I did bump that doe on my way in, but there was a cold chill in the air and a hint of wet. And I watched no sooner did I get into my stand. 3 does making their way down the trail past my stand on the opposite side of the cornfield. I had a good feeling. One, because I knew that I had placed my stand in a good position, but also that there might be more. I had in fact bumped the doe earlier, but she had not blown when she spooked. Sitting, watching, waiting, listening, I peered over my shoulder, and there she was. She came out of an opening in the trees where she had disappeared into, and she was slowly feeding along the end rows. Watching, hoping, praying, willing the doe to continue down the fence row, but being vigilant of my other directions. I sat, hoping that if I did not pay attention to her, that she would simply walk down the fence row toward my stand. And she got even closer and even closer. Luckily, branches obscured me from her view as she fed her way down the end row, just out of sight of the camera. Everything was so absolutely perfect as she neared the kill zone, where I would have no trouble in putting an arrow through her kill zone. Watching, waiting, flinching at every rustle of squirrel in the leaves, until, finally, she simply turned around and walked back into her bed, frustrating me after an hour of waiting in the chill at attention.
Well, that was an exciting shiver fest. As you can see, the cornfield got picked, and the deer were absolutely everywhere. The wind was perfect. I'll fix her. Got a ground set here where she was coming in and out of. And I got a camera mount set. So I'll fix her.
Living in real life rather than in real tree land, where sex isn't like pornography and hunting isn't like the TV shows, I got to the field much later than I wanted to, and I walked up on another doe feeding out in the corn shucks. The ambush tonight was absolutely perfect. It was a calm and chilly early fall evening. The magic hour was approaching, and everything in this ambush was absolutely perfect. I had seen deer coming down off of their beds on the hillside, funneled down along the fence row directly in front of me, to pass these 3 twisted trees countless occasions. Last night I had seen 3 does take this very route. The ambush was absolutely perfect, and even if deer came from behind me, I would still be able to get a shot because another fence row would funnel them past me so that I could actually get my bow drawn. You have to see it in your head and have an idea of what you want it to look like so that you can set it up that way. Hunting on film has all the problems of hunting combined with all the problems of wildlife photography, combined with the need for an accurate shot on film, no less. The squirrels were crunching in the dry grass, causing my nerves to twitch. The magic hour was upon me, and I hoped that deer would be coming off of their beds at the top of the hill and funneling past me, offering me a beautiful broadside shot. But the ancient dance of predator and prey cannot be cheated. Every encounter is a gift from God, and in this case I was a day behind as the darkness came down. Everything had been so absolutely perfect, but yet every day of hunting is exactly the same, but every day of hunting is just a little bit different.
Perfect setup, but they didn't come down the hill into the field tonight. I don't know what else I can tell you. You can't cheat the mountain. But season's still relatively young.
It was the first frost of the year, and sitting in the frozen darkness, the air was so still, and everything was perfect as the sun slowly began to rise to bring life into the dark hillside. I had hoped that with the frost, deer would come past my stand to absorb the south slope's sunlight. Seemed like an absolutely perfect ambush. The sun continued to rise, and I marveled at the beauty of creation, watching the frost slowly melt as the temperature slowly went up. The guns were ringing out from the river, and everything was so absolutely perfect as the geese flew toward the south. I was hopeful. But every day of hunting is exactly the same. But every day of hunting is just a little bit different. Just yesterday morning, 2 does had visited this stand about this time. And as the geese continued to fly south, and the squirrels scampered amongst the tree limbs, I sat watching, waiting, and listening, until finally my morning of hunting came to an end. I had sat through hours of misting rain. I had gotten in very early for an evening hunt, about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Squirrels rustled in the weeds. Geese and ducks flew south overhead. And still I sat, bored out of my mind. Every day of hunting is exactly the same, but every day of hunting is just a little bit different. Quite frequently, sitting in a deer stand or in an ambush set such as this, I wonder if I would be better served as a waterfowler. But hours passed. The ambush was perfect, the wind in my face. And almost instantly, as soon as a deer came from beneath my stand opposite to me across the field, I realized that I had been simply outwitted yet again. My heart began to race and my mind filled with a predatory clarity as I realized that just perhaps I might make it happen and break my whitetail curse. Sitting as still as I could, I watched 2 does come across the field and stop near the middle. Out of range, graceful but yet watchful, the wind still in my face, they moved ever closer, and yet I hoped against my own hope, and I dared to pray as they moved even closer. It was a game of inches as they continued to move closer, watching and waiting, hoping, praying. My movement and fidgeting caught their attention. And while some of you may be screaming, "Shoot, shoot," I had one of the doe's attention, and even as she tried to figure out what I was, her eyes were on me, and I did not even dare draw my bow, even if she had been in range of me. The perfect broadside shot would have been absolutely easy for a compound archer. And so, they moved off through the field, and I sat contemplating the mystery, the visceral mystery of the hunt. It never ceases to amaze me how hours and hours of boredom can be replaced with a few agonizing minutes of predatory clarity. There are 29 huntable species of big game in North America: Alaskan brown bear, black bear, grizzly bear, polar bear, the cougar, Columbian black-tailed deer, Coues deer, mule deer, Sitka blacktail, Rocky Mountain elk, Roosevelt elk, Thule elk, barren ground caribou, central barren ground caribou, mountain caribou, Quebec Labrador caribou, woodland caribou, Alaskan Yukon moose, Canadian moose, Shiras moose, American bison, musk ox, American mountain goat, pronghorn antelope, California bighorn sheep, Dall sheep, desert bighorn sheep, Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep, and stone sheep, and of course, the whitetail. And yet, every hunter who chases the super slam of North American big game animals has a curse species. My curse is that it just happens to be the white-tailed deer. Sitting, watching, waiting, listening. It was the type of October evening that all Midwestern whitetail hunters dream about. Perfectly calm, chilly, absolutely perfect. And as if on cue, as the magic hour came into being, does came from 100 yards behind me and made their way out into the field. So absolutely perfect. I enjoyed a chaw of tobacco, knowing that they were in no danger. But still I maintained a level of vigilance, fidgeting as little as I possibly could, because there is a delicious uncertainty in fair chase hunting. And as the night came down, and the magic hour began to wane, every day of hunting is exactly the same, but every day of hunting is just a little bit different. I won't pretend to you that I had high expectations for this particular hunt, but you can't hunt deer unless you're actually hunting deer. Every day of hunting is exactly the same, but yet every day of hunting is just a little bit different. The same primal emotions of our ancestors mixed in with different sights, different sounds, and even different smells. You will never know what can happen under your stand unless you're in it. And while I did not have high expectations for this hunt, I didn't expect anything to go right, because generally speaking in my life it never does. I still went out for an evening hunt because I had time. Sitting, watching, waiting, listening, doing my best not to fidget. Thinking of the comments and looking forward to reading all of your easy wall hanger successes, and how you all must be mystified, and how the shittiest deer hunter in the world has yet to hang one on the wall. Well, the fact is, I love the story The Old Man and the Sea. Here's the Cliff Notes version of it. Santiago, the old man, fishes for 84 days without a single bite. And then, spoiler alert, he catches the biggest fish of his entire life. However, there is a tragic ending. And this was on my mind as I sat watching, waiting, listening, squirrels scampering around the creek bed, sending my nerves on edge as the magic hour came and went. I thought that Santiago, no matter what, went fishing. And this hunting story has rapidly become, rather than the old man and the sea, the young man and the woods. Midwestern whitetail hunters all dream about hunting the rut, but yet the rut comes and the rut goes. And if you don't get one before the rut or during the rut, then the pressure is really on. As always, everything is always so perfect just before dawn, when anything and everything is possible, and tussocks of grass and waving weeds become deer in the phantasmagoria of the imagination. But when daylight comes, it washes it all away, and you know in your bones and in your heart that you have a long day ahead of you. And yet, sitting, watching, waiting, listening, staring, burning a hole with my eyes through my failed food plot, I realized that the whitetail hunting marketing conglomerates really have it figured out. They've got it figured out that we will buy food plot seed, hand over fist, and hobby farm it. And they've figured out that we will dump deer piss $15 to $30 a bottle on the ground as if we were doing witchcraft. And so I was staring at some rutted up ground, watching, waiting, listening, the wind blowing out of the absolute wrong direction, but at least I was sitting upon a rub line. How ironic is whitetail hunting? Almost all the crops were picked now. There was a hayfield to my left on the opposite side of the fence line, and I was overlooking my chicory plot that was quite failed, but spotty at best. Watching, waiting, listening, I had gotten into my stand a little bit after the stroke of noon. To my left and right were rub lines and a small pond to my right side. Every day of hunting is exactly the same, but every day of hunting is just a little bit different. Illinois, outside of the tall timber, is so open and flat when all the crops are out. You can see literally for miles, which is good if you do get an arrow into a deer, simply because it means the deer has to cross at least 1,000 yards of open ground before it would get to any cover. So it would make the deer probably go down inside of you. The downside is, without that timber there is no mystery. And sitting, watching, waiting, listening, plotting and scheming as the magic hour finally began to pass me by, I wondered, had I missed my chance? But Santiago fished 84 days without catching a fish, and so I would hunt. Despite my disparaging remarks about food plots and deer scents, it didn't stop me from shelling out over $100 to put in a throw and grow plot on top of the tilled up corn stubble, and it didn't stop me from buying a whole bunch of Estrus lure to put on a drag line in preparation for the rut. Every day of hunting is exactly the same, but every day of hunting is just a little bit different. And the slow descent into madness continued. An unseasonably warm November 1st evening, I was sitting on the ground about 50 yards from my stand that overlooked the cornfield, watching, waiting, listening, occasionally Osage oranges dropping and causing my nerves to shatter when squirrels ran through the leaves behind me. I had my bow in my hand, occasionally, hoping that a deer would pass me. Everything was perfect, even down to the wind, and yet I had chosen the wrong set. I watched a buck, large enough that I could count his points from across the field, pass my twisted trees ground set. And all I could do was throw my hands up and laugh at my own futility. I was so intent at watching the buck up on the hillside in the gathering darkness that I had not even paid attention to the does that were coming from beneath my stand that overlooked the cornfield and working their way across the field toward me. I had no idea that they were there, until within 15 yards of me, they walked past me as I stood up in the darkness to actually call it an evening. They were bold as brass, knowing that the shooting light had passed, and paid me no mind. It was an afternoon and evening hunt. It was the absolute perfect hunting, but yet every day of hunting is exactly the same. But every day of hunting is just a little bit different. The same primal emotions, the same excitement, the same disappointment, and yet every day of hunting is just a little bit different. Different sights, different sounds, different smells. The wind was absolutely perfect for ambush. It was a little bit chilly, but yet unseasonably warm. And so I was dressed quite light for the evening hunt, watching the field edges, knowing that at some point a deer might walk beneath my stand and the gods of the hunt would bless me. Watching the briars beneath my stand, I noticed a rabbit, but yet it was not yet rabbit season, and so it was safe. Squirrels scampered around beneath my tree as well, and I watched them, occasionally glancing across the field. The magic hour was approaching. Everything was so perfect. Perhaps hours of boredom would culminate in a moment of truth, when life and death would hang in the balance, and the visceral mystery of the hunt, communion in full with Mother Nature, would be realized. Watching, waiting, listening. And then, as shooting light faded, like a shotgun blast, all over the field, deer were appearing from their beds. My hunts are more like a high-stakes game of whack-a-mole. Part of the problem with hunting and its modern perception is that it is presented in the popular media as effortless, a cavalcade of almost pornographic impact shots and kill celebrations. I bring you the reality of hunting. Sitting, watching, waiting, listening. Incredible highs, deep, depressing lows, and the visceral, unfathomable mystery of the hunt. It was a type of November evening that all Midwestern whitetail hunters dream about. The air was so still. The geese flew overhead, and squirrels chattered around me, and I waited for the buck to pass me, if a buck should ever appear. The magic hour was upon me, and I held my bow in my hand at the ready. I had 2 points of ambush, but yet, as the night came down, and shooting light faded to almost nothing, I realized that I, the great hunter, had been outwitted yet again. I honestly never sleep worth a damn before a morning hunt. Tossing, turning, hoping, dreaming, plotting, praying, and scheming. Before this hunt, I had laid out a drag line made out of a mop head and about 8 ounces of doe estrus. I had hiked it around the field edges and brought it back under my stand for the perfect ambush. Every day of hunting is exactly the same, but every day of hunting is just a little bit different. And I hope to lure a buck crossing the field to where I wanted him to be. But deer are wild and free, unpredictable creatures. As the sun came up and got higher and higher, I sat watching, waiting, listening, and wondering as the mist and fog of the perfect morning burned away. And then, out of nowhere, a buck came following my rut line as if he had a ring through his nose. And then simply sheared off because I had dragged my line across another doe's trail. And he took off right past my tree stand at the hilltop across the field. And I watched him follow his doe out of her bed and chase her across the hillside. And so, hoping that another buck would happen by, I waited, watching and listening and enjoying the beautiful early fall morning as the sun rose higher and higher. It had been a huge gamble, and a quite expensive gamble, to put out an estrus line. And I was getting quite tired, honestly, because I never sleep very well before a morning hunt. And I had put out my estrus line at 4 in the morning and spent cold hours in the stand in the dark. And so my hunt came to an end, foiled yet again by the wily whitetails. Hunting with a traditional bow has its difficulties, but one thing that is incredibly important in traditional bow hunting is figuring out where the animals are going to be, figuring out where they want to be, and getting along their travel route in order to intercept them at a close distance because of the limited range. And there is no substitute for watching the animals. The most difficult animal that I have found to hunt is not a whitetail buck. They can be called, they can be lured with sexual attractant scents. But a whitetail doe cares absolutely nothing. And so there is no substitute for actually being there and figuring out where they want to be and being there ahead of them. My bow in my hand, every rustle in the grass caused my nerves to shiver. And then as the darkness started to gather, I looked across the hillside out into the corn, and I saw a heavy-headed buck moving along the base of the hillside, well out of range, but simply watching him and where he was exiting and re-entering the timber. Outwitted, outmaneuvered, and failing at the end of each day, I also noticed that the stand that I wasn't perched near had whitetail does coming out of it like a shotgun blast. The slow descent into madness continued. Every day of hunting is exactly the same, but every day of hunting is just a little bit different. I was sitting on a brush pile in a ragweed thicket within some oak trees at the opposite side of the cornfield, alongside the trail that I had seen the buck go into the night previously. Watching, waiting, listening. Every day of hunting is exactly the same, but every day of hunting is just a little bit different. And mystically, a doe entered the field. I watched her, wondering if she was going to come across to the oak thicket as the corn stalks and shelled corn had been tilled under. But I carefully watched my back trail, and so as the sun began to sink lower and lower, geese flew overhead to the south, and I continued to watch the doe up on the hillside across from me. Yet again, I had been outwitted, perhaps simply by random chance, and then hours of boredom culminated in that very same doe being chased around the ridgetop by a buck. I grunted at him in an attempt to challenge him and pull him off of the doe, but he was so massively large that I was in awe and the sun continued to sink, and outwitted yet again, my hunt came to an end. The quest goes on. Every day of hunting is exactly the same, but every day of hunting is just a little bit different. I feel a bit foolish because of the amount of money that I had put into tree stands in order to sit on a camp stool for much of the season. One of the main advantages of hunting on the ground is plain and simple, you can be fluid. You can go to where the deer are, or where you think the deer are going to be. It was the absolute perfect afternoon as the evening came on. The wind was absolutely perfect. The ambush was absolutely perfect. Me tucked behind a bush. As you can clearly see on the film, a well-worn deer trail in front of me. I had put up a scent wick. While I do not have a lot of faith in the attraction value, it does at least keep them occupied if they come in. The wind held perfectly, and I still sat, watching, waiting, listening. I had gotten in very early in the afternoon thanks to a tractor breakdown that would not be fixed until the next day. Sitting behind my bush, feeling fidgety and foolish, and wondering if, for once, everything would just go right. The evening came on, and the magic hour was upon me. Watching, waiting, listening. The small birds rustling in the ragweed set my nerves on edge. There were no squirrels today. The air had a perceptible chill, and it heightened my excitement. And then I looked up across the hillside from beneath my opposite stand, and like a ghost came a spike buck across the top of the hillside. Everything was so perfect, and I watched him with joy that for once I had been on the right side of the field. And yet, as he got closer, I realized that it was not a doe, and it was in fact a spike. And I was not about to shoot a spike buck. I'm not that desperate yet. And so, he made his way along the trail, up the hill further, and away from me. And still I sat in hopes that another buck might try and chase him away. I had set up alongside of a gap in the fence where the deer trail went, and the geese mocked me as they flew overhead. Hunting is a very spiritual and humbling experience. Every day of hunting is exactly the same, but every day of hunting is just a little bit different. And just as sex is nothing like pornography, true hunting is nothing like what is portrayed on many TV shows. And I continue to bring you the reality of traditional bow hunting for whitetail. It is our closest approximation that we can achieve in modern day life to a full communion with nature, body, blood, and spirit. Sitting, watching, waiting, listening. I unashamedly hunt for sport, and there would be no joy in it if it were easy. Accomplishment is directly proportional to difficulty and effort. And so, it does not bother me if I come up empty. It is for joy of the chase that I hunt, rather than joy of the kill. And I would not have shot that young buck that crossed my path, even had he been in range, because I am a slave to my ethics. And it is very poor deer management to slay young bucks, and yet foiled again by the wild, majestic whitetail. Everything is always so perfect just before dawn, and every Midwestern whitetail hunter knows that frozen hour before dawn, where in the darkness everything is perfect and anything is possible. And normally, when the sun rises and begins to burn away the phantasmagoria that your mind has created, there is nothing there. But on this morning, two does in the darkness had made their way behind my stand. They were screened by the thorns of the honey locust trees as they moved. Now, while they stayed until the sun was high, I could not get a clear shot at them, and so I remained in the hoar-frosted tree. Every day of hunting is exactly the same, but every day of hunting is just a little bit different, as the guns of the waterfowlers continued to thunder from the river. I watched deer from the full moon, well fed, walk back down the gully on the hillside, well out of range, focused on where they went, and hoped as this frost began to melt that they would make their way down my trail. It is a special kind of terrible beauty when the sun rises over the frosted woods, because the frost becomes smoke from the thermal radiation, but then freezes in the air. And as noontime bore down, after hours and hours of sitting, I realized that this hunt would come to a close. But I had been given a beautiful glimpse of the majestic whitetail. Closer and closer I seemed to be getting to my goal of a whitetail buck, as if I were zeroing a rifle to 1,000 yards, one click every shot. I desperately would like to kill a buck with a bow and arrow. Not just a bow and arrow, but with my traditional archery equipment. A buck that I can be proud of. But I do not hunt for joy of the kill. I hunt for joy of the chase. And I am perfectly contented to be outwitted and outmaneuvered and fail at the end of each day, as Hemingway said, provided that I do not compromise my ethics. Every day of hunting is exactly the same, but every day of hunting is just a little bit different. And you cannot know what will happen on a hunt until you have actually hunted. And I have a hunting story for you. You see, while I do not want to compromise my ethics, and while I do want to desperately get a buck that I can be proud of, even if I come up empty-handed, it's fine. But I will confess that with the gun season rapidly approaching, where the woods in Illinois turn into a blaze orange battleground that sounds like a war zone and looks like Christmas, I was feeling a bit of mounting pressure. I had also moved my stand further down the hillside, and if you look straight across behind the pine tree, you will see one of my ground sets. And then, at the edge of dark, just beneath the stand tree that I had previously used before I moved, a buck came striding down the ragweed trail. And I could only throw my hands up and laugh at my own futility. During the rut, bucks tend to move at any time of day, and so as I reached my stand at midday, I was in for a long and potentially boring sit. Every day of hunting is exactly the same, but every day of hunting is just a little bit different. Different sights, different sounds, different smells, same primal emotions, great excitement, deep anticipation, perhaps deep disappointment. and always the potential for a moment of truth where life and death will hang in the balance. I could not have asked for a more perfect day for deer hunting. There was a chill in the air, the wind was perfect for this stand that I had hung by the light of the full moon. The ragweed trail was in front of me, the cornfield was behind me, and I was actually set up in a tri-fork of a tree to break up my silhouette. The sun began to sink lower and lower, and my excitement was heightened. The trails were cut deeply into the grass, and I hoped upon hope that this evening I would see some action, and I would get the chance that I was seeking. Outwitted, outmaneuvered, and failing at the end of each day, as Hemingway said. As the sun sank lower and lower, the blaze-orange battleground of shotgun season was approaching. Because if you do not get your deer before the first shotgun season in Illinois, the odds drop dramatically. But the merry chase went on, sitting, watching, waiting, listening, the sinking sun still heightening my excitement, and birds rustling in the ragweed sent my nerves on edge. And yet, as the shooting light faded, my hunt came to a close, and I question whether a hunt can be perfect if you leave the woods empty-handed. We again join our bumbling hero in his visceral mystery of the hunt, his quest to tag a wily whitetail buck that he can be proud of. I have one transcendental quality. No matter what, I am talented at screwing things up. It was a blustery morning. There was a chill in the air, and I had dressed too lightweight, and so I was shivering from the convection of the wind going right through my canab pants. Deer were everywhere that I was not, and it wouldn't be an Illinois archery season if I did not drop my camera out of my stand at least once in the season. But no, I dropped it out of my stand twice this season on a single day this morning from having numbed fingers. Deer were everywhere except for where I wanted them to be, and the shotgun season was ticking ever closer by the minute. And so, watching, waiting, listening, shivering, I remained in my resolve. There is a delicious uncertainty to a fair chase deer hunt, and I always learn while I am hunting. Simply put, I wish that I had put a stand in this tree earlier in the season so that I would have had it here, because the trails are so deeply cut in the grass that they would have no suspicion. But this late in the season, deer become very unpredictable. And so, my quest goes on. I do not feel cheated if I leave the woods empty-handed. But I will confess to you, I'm not very good at deer hunting. The day had calmed greatly and warmed up quite a bit, and so I decided for the afternoon hunt that I would be hunting my food plot stand next to the hayfield. I always feel incredibly foolish when I am hunting this particular stand, simply because it is so far away from all other timber that it just seems that there's no reason for an animal to come. But yet, I had pictures on my trail camera about 3 o'clock in the afternoon on days, several days in fact, that I had not been in this stand. And so, I decided that I was going to take a chance at abandoning my other stand for hunting a stand in a completely different county. Sitting, watching, waiting, listening, watching the bugs fly over the pond and the birds fly for the bugs. Not very hopeful as shotgun season inched ever closer. And yet, it is not that I look down upon those who hunt with a shotgun. It just so happens that the deer that I killed with a shotgun, I could have probably killed with a spear. And so, the first part of Illinois archery season came to a close. I am empty-handed, but my soul is full, for I have hunted and done my best.
So let me just say that the real life whitetail hunting is bullshit, because I just got done doing farm work and climbing up into my stand.
I had a good feeling about this hunt because this particular piece of property, while it is away from all other trees, we also don't allow shotgun hunting on it. And so, making my way to my stand in the late afternoon to try and squeeze in a hunt, I had a good feeling. But making my way up the ladder of my stand, I realized that there were two does that were watching me, preparing to enter my food plot, that had been there before I arrived. And so, precariously placed, all I could do was watch them. Sometimes I am my own worst enemy. But the hunt goes on, and it is a very merry chase. There was a cold, cold chill in the air, bitter on my face. It had been an unseasonably warm fall, and so I was hopeful that they would come back to the pine trees and the cattail marsh for the thermal cover. But as the sun sank lower and lower, I realized that it was not to be. Despite my failed ambush, I had been able to witness the cattail pond begin to freeze over. Life is not like pornography, and hunting is not like TV shows. And if it were easy, there would be no joy in doing it. And so as the cold darkness came down, I realized my instinct had been true. My timing had been poor. There is always a quiet desperation in my heart when I am deer hunting, because while I desperately want to kill a buck that I can be proud of, I have very little control over it. Sitting, watching, waiting, listening, enjoying the visceral mystery of the hunt, there was a cold, wet chill in the air, and there was rain on the way. Overlooking the ragweed trail and enjoying the quiet desolation that said winter was approaching. And as rain softly pattered down upon me, I realized that while I hate cold weather, I would be happy for some snow. And despite the rowdiness of the recent shotgun season, I hoped that the weather would have the whitetail moving. There is nothing at all like hunting whitetail on snow, if for no other reason than the whiteness of the ground makes their bodies pop, and it is very exciting. But from the time that a fawn drops out of a doe, it begins avoiding predation. And those who think that hunting is not a sport do not realize that the game has almost all the advantage. And as the darkness came down, bringing this hunt to a close, the perfect hunt, I had been outwitted again as I saw a buck stand up from the open cornfield that I had not even seen. Every day of hunting is exactly the same, but every day of hunting is just a little bit different. Different sights, different sounds, even different smells, but the same primal emotions and unbearable anticipation. I was hunting a different stand along the creek bank. It had been raining most of the day, and quite honestly, this deep into the season, I never have high hopes. But, as I say very often, you can't know what's going to happen unless you're there. And so, watching, waiting, listening, and quite honestly enjoying the beautiful music of the creek behind me. The rain continued, and the squirrels scampered amongst the branches in front of me, well out of range. Occasionally a rabbit would hop through the briars, and at the sight of brown I would get all excited for vast disappointment. And also, while the rabbit was in season, he was also out of range. Animals are smart. This may be a revelation, but I am not particularly good at deer hunting. But deer hunting is what I love to do. It is a labor of love at times. But my hopes were wet yet again when the sun began to sink lower and lower. The magic hour was at hand. But in the darkness that was coming and the rain that continued, I realized tonight it was not to be. But I had been given a beautiful glimpse into the visceral mystery of the hunt. It was a gray-skied, cold day. Not quite freezing, but just barely above 32. Every day of hunting is exactly the same, but every day of hunting is just a little bit different. And you never truly know what will happen on a hunt until you have hunted. And so, sitting up next to the small cattail pond overlooking my food plot on this cold gray afternoon, I forced myself to be hopeful. Now you see, I would love to present you with a beautiful ethical kill. But, in fact, I deal in reality and do not deal in the fantasy of Realtree land. And so, sadly, yesterday I guessed the wrong stand, which is very ironic because very few pictures of whitetail have showed up on my cameras during daylight hours after the shotgun season. But I am human and fallible, and I can only work with what God sends me. And so as the temperature continued to drop a little bit lower, I sat, hoping against hope that the deer would be coming to the thermal cover of the cattails and the pine tree and perhaps munch upon my food plot. But you never really know. And enduring the cold as it came on harder and harder, the wind calmed at the very end of daylight. Watching, waiting, listening, and hoping against hope until the last of the shooting light was gone, reflecting on my past hunts and potential failures. Go ahead and crucify me. I am a hunter. I had just got done doing the chores on the farm and climbed up into a stand. This would have been an excellent stand to have in earlier in the year. But my education as a deer hunter goes on. It overlooks two deeply cut deer trails where they funnel down to exit the hillside into the field at a cut in the fence. It was a heavy gray-skied day just above freezing, and honestly quite depressing. It is always difficult to convince yourself to go deer hunting after the first shotgun season, and the rut may or may not have concluded. But I will be here in a stand until the last dog is hung. Through bitter winds and savage snows, I will remain, because I am on a quest to tell you a hunting story. Every day of hunting is exactly the same, but every day of hunting is just a little bit different. And you cannot know what will happen on a hunt until you have hunted. A squirrel scrambling through the thorn branches can send your nerves on edge. The rustle in the grass of a bird flitting around in the ragweed can send your heart into your throat with great disappointment and great excitement, never knowing if you will be blessed with a moment of truth where your arrow might carry you back 20,000 years to join in the mystery of the hunt. And the mystery goes on as this week of hunting came to a close with the last of shooting light.
And the slow descent into madness continues. I hope you guys are having a more successful bow season than I am.
And so you find yourself again at my cyber campfire. My goal is to carry on the ancient tradition of the hunting story and bring you with me upon my hunts. And for those of you who have never experienced or endured a frozen sunrise from a deer stand, it is one of the most austere and beautiful things that you can ever witness as the sun comes up over the horizon and sets the land on fire, melting the frozen fog into a chilly mist. Every day of hunting is exactly the same, but every day of hunting is just a little bit different. And once the phantasmagoria had been burned away, I remained as hopeful as I possibly could, with the grass still frozen beneath my stand, hopeful that the deer would be crossing between the cornfields up on the hillside and taking their deeply cut path just behind the pine trees in front of my stand. Everything, even down to the wind, was so perfect and remained so perfect as the guns boomed from the river, from the goose hunters, sitting, watching, waiting, listening, extremely excited and yet tempered with disappointment. Primal emotions were stirred in me as I witnessed the beauty of creation and the natural world as an active participant in the food chain, hunting as if there were nothing else, telling you a hunting story through my voice and through my camera is my goal. And if I come home empty-handed, I do not feel cheated as long as I have told you my hunting story.
We're gonna go a little unconventional tonight.
It was just above freezing for much of the day. The chores were done and the wind was right, and so I headed up to my tiny little chicory plot in the tiny little timber next to the tiny little pond, and I was sitting beneath my deer stand next to a pine tree in the fence row with a jar of code blue doe estrus in hopes of distracting a buck if he crossed the 1,000 yards to this plot. The shotgun season over the past weekend had sent much of the deer activity completely nocturnal, but I was happy to see that a decent buck had survived. And the amount of doe activity in the area told me that if there were still some in Estrus, they might be visiting and being chased by a buck. So sitting, watching, waiting, and listening, feeling a bit of quiet desperation as the next firearm season edged closer and closer every minute, I did my best to remain hopeful. The deer activity seemed very concentrated as the temperature seemed to be dropping by the day. And so, as the last of the light began to fade, this hunt came to an end. It was an absolutely miserable day, but the chores were done, and so I headed to my stand. It had been raining literally all day, and the rain had slackened, but the gale force winds were still in effect. And provided that my stand tree did not rip from the soft, wet ground, I would remain. Every day of hunting is exactly the same, but every day of hunting is just a little bit different. Sitting, swaying, watching, waiting, listening. Those of us who have hunted tree stands much of our lives know what it is to be tree sick. There are certain types of hunting that require physical endurance, but deer hunting from a deer stand requires an incredible amount of endurance of the will, the ability to go out day after day and yet return home empty-handed with nothing to show for it but soaking wet clothing and perhaps a smile. Even the squirrels were not to be found, and I watched the margins of the field, hoping against hope that I would at least be given a sign of a deer. And yet, normally, when the sun begins to fall, the winds slacken. This evening it was not the case. The chores were done yet again, and it was a new day, completely opposite from the day before. Today it was 50 degrees and calm, as opposed to the 38 degrees and driving rain and gale force winds. Deer are wild and free, majestic, unpredictable creatures, and such is the joy of hunting them, and why I call the ancient sacrament of the hunt a visceral mystery, a full communion with nature. And yet, 4 does frolicked in the corn stubble far away from my stand. They ran back and forth, chasing one another. Hunting deer after the rut is difficult. Hunting deer after the first shotgun season is difficult. Solo hunting and filming and hunting with a recurve has its own compounded difficulties. But I was set up over the ragweed trail yet again. The wind was in my face, the temperature was dropping, and everything was perfect, and I was determined that I would sit until the last of the light, even though all my instincts were telling me that the season was winding down and that my curse would remain unbroken. My last hunt of the second archery season, nothing was going right. My camera on the remote was on the fritz. My camera on my bow was on the fritz. And nothing was going right. It was a cold day, intermittent between rain and sleet. I had cut the top out of a ground blind to give me limb clearance, and normally nothing going right is an excellent sign that I'm going to have a chance to screw up on a deer. My heart was filled with desperation and excitement. And just as an aside, for some reason, even though we never see people looking like they do on the magazine, man or female, whichever sex you're attracted to, for some reason, we always expect to see a Pope and Young buck on our trail cam or beneath our stand. As the sun continued to fade and the temperature continued to drop, my cameras continued to give me trouble, and my second archery season came to an end, yet again empty-handed. The snow had finally arrived, and the guns were silent yet again. I was a bit disheartened by the fact that 2 of my trail cameras had been stolen off of this property during the previous gun season. However, such is life, and the hunting story goes on, and the slow descent into madness continues. Frigid air clawed at my face, but at least the wind was right. Deer were moving all around me. I could see them silhouetted against the white blanket as they moved within the tree line. Every day of hunting is exactly the same, but every day of hunting is just a little bit different. I do not bear any ill will toward gun hunters. However, the only deer that I ever killed with a shotgun, I could have killed with a bow. It was that close. And so I don't even bother to hunt the gun seasons, because I am on a quest to take a buck with my recurve. Not just any buck, but a buck that I can be proud of. The winter night was coming on fast, and deer movement picked up, at least everywhere except for underneath of my tree. Everything was so perfect and frozen and beautiful. Such is the majesty of the late season archery hunt. And as the winter night continued to come down, I forced myself, despite the cold, to hunt every last inch of the daylight that I could, hoping against hope. Earlier in the day, the temperature had gotten above freezing, and so much of the snow had melted. I was sitting up behind the cattail pond in the pine trees, almost hopeful that with the dropping temperature that was dropping along with the sun, that deer would be coming into the thermal cover. I found myself very disillusioned, with a cocktail of melancholy and desperation and futility sloshing around in my head, punctuated by those little white lies that our minds tell us that we know as hope. I hunt whitetail under less than ideal circumstances, and it is very difficult to chase the North American 29 when your curse species is the first one, being whitetail. I had done everything that I possibly could, figuratively speaking, to appease the gods of the hunt. I had even competed in the Train to Hunt challenge in the traditional division. But yet, it seemed like all futility. Hunting and religions are inexplicably linked, but still I remained, keeping the faith, watching, waiting, and listening as the bitter cold nipped at my nose and clawed at my cheeks, and the road thundered past, until the very last of shooting light I remained in my stand. I will not pretend to you that I am a good deer hunter, and the gods of the hunt are not entirely at fault in their visceral mystery, for I had been given chances that I had blown, and there is still much that I have to learn. I had pushed clear to the back of the cornfield and found a well-used trail next to a deadfall tree that I had secreted myself away in. It was a little bit too late for a good hunt by the time that I finally got into the woods and got real life out of the way, with the daylight slipping like sand through the hourglass away from me. But every day of hunting is exactly the same, and every day of hunting is just a little bit different. And I had not pushed into this untouched part of the property by me until now, but desperation was pushing me, despite my hopes to not push deer around the property by the time that I had got hiked in. Watching, waiting, listening, the occasional flock of geese flying overhead, the wind in my face, set up 5 yards away from the trail, ready for the perfect shot with the deadfall shielding me. But yet, nothing came down the frigid trail. It was well below freezing and dropping further as the sun went all the way down, and my hunt came to an end with the muzzleloader season approaching. Every time we venture into the woods as hunters, as human predators, we test ourselves, at least if you're doing it right. Every day of hunting is exactly the same, but every day of hunting is just a little bit different. And every time we venture into the woods, it is a brand new test. It may be a test of skill, or it may be a test of endurance. And testing yourself is part of hunting. A man can break himself against nature, and nature simply will not care. The mountain does not care. The woods do not care. The bitter winds of winter do not care. And all you can do as a pathetic human being in the wild is hope to endure. Watching, waiting, listening. The wind clawing at my face, and I was set up along the deer trail. Everything was so majestically savage and austere in a violent beauty. Freezing, numbing cold, testing my willpower to remain. I was set up in the deadfall along the deer trail. The occasional squirrel would scurry behind me, sending my nerves on edge. Hoping, praying, watching, waiting, listening. I had gotten in about noon. And so I sat, my fingers burning from the wrist down, as the cold began to penetrate my layers after hours and hours of exposure. But hoping that a deer would come past my log, the perfect ambush 10 yards away from the trail on the oak ridge, wishing and cursing myself for not hunting this spot earlier in the season. But hindsight is 20/20. And I am full of mistakes. I will never claim to be a good deer hunter. I will never claim to be a good hunter. But by God, I will hang on to my deer season until the last dog is hung. Because you cannot take a deer if you are not in the woods. And I take great pride in the fact that I am willing to go out and sit and watch and wait and listen, knowing that my chances of success are slim to none. But there is that one chance that things might go right, might go according to plan. And so, gritting my teeth against the cold, I remained, determined to remain until the last of light. It is as exciting as it is disappointing, straining your frost-burned ears against the wind, trying to differentiate what might be hoofbeats on the leaves, as opposed to simply wind-tossed down foliage. What is sexy is a screaming September bull in the Rockies at 15 yards while the weather is nice. What is not sexy is sitting and slowly feeling your hands go numb. There is a primal terror that comes with that creeping, aching, burning sensation that frustratingly climbs down your hands into your fingertips as you sit, wondering if a deer did show up, could you even get the bow back, or would your fingers become numbed flippers, useless? But Santiago hunted 84 days without catching a fish. And so my hunting story goes on as the night of winter came down. The snow stung my face as it whipped around in the wind. And everything was perfect in a terribly beautiful way, because nature simply does not care. The slow descent into madness continues. My quest goes on, testing myself against the elements and figuratively trying to prove myself to the gods of the woods, hoping that they might find me worthy to take a deer, hoping that they might provide me with what I seek. Every day of hunting is exactly the same, but every day of hunting is just a little bit different. And after the gun seasons, when deer become incredibly shy, it goes from a high-stakes game of whack-a-mole to where the hell are all the damn deer? I swear it is difficult to go out day after day knowing that your odds of seeing something are very slim, that your odds of getting something within range are very slim. And I am reminded of the way the Inuit hunt seal on the ice, with a harpoon standing over a seal hole. And the only thing that matters is this circle. I was truly blessed to see a buck scamper like a water bug across the opposite ridge, moving from cover to cover. I was so happy that this buck had survived that I did not even care that he was not on my trail. But with as calm as the wind was, I could hear every bird flitting through the bare branches. I could hear every squirrel, and I peered out of the deadfall along the oak saddle, watching, waiting, listening, hoping, praying, yearning, desiring, and enduring the unceasing cold in all of its brutal majesty, waiting for a deer to come up the trail and present itself to me. You never truly know what goes on in the woods until you've been there. And it is easy when you're away from the woods to fantasize about what might be happening. I am truly blessed to be able to hunt as much as I am able to hunt. But when you are there, there is very little mystery. And so the sun came down on yet another unsuccessful outdoors adventure. It was a long, cold day, starting at about noon, and I was determined that I was going to stay until dark. You might be wondering why I am hunting on the ground. You see, after my trail cameras disappeared, I decided that I was going to pull all of my stands out of this particular property to minimize my financial loss. And also, at this point in the season, when deer are incredibly skittish and the weather is incredibly cold, it takes their mind off of sex with the rut being over with and puts their mind on calories. And so I was hopeful that while all the corn in the field had been tilled under, that they would be coming to the oak saddle for the acorns. And secreted away in the deadfall, this would have been the perfect ambush earlier in the season. But as I am wont to do most of the time, I had learned too late. There's an old saying that you can't truly know someone until you've been in a fight with them. And I would say that you cannot truly appreciate a white-tailed deer, their wiliness and their majesty, until you have tried to kill one. Outside of human society and, quote, civilization, it is a state of nature. Only the strong survive. Generation upon generation has produced animals that are incredibly good at avoiding predation. Not only from avoiding natural predation, but at avoiding human predation. And only the strong and the smart survive. If you think that it is boring watching these hunting videos in the comfort of your own home, imagine how boring it is in the late whitetail season to sit watching, listening, and waiting, fighting the frigid elements in hopes that a buck or a doe might pass my deadfall to feed upon the acorns on the oak saddle. Spitting Copenhagen between my boots and counting how many seconds it takes before it freezes solid to entertain myself, waiting on the magic hour, hoping and praying. But still my quest goes on. Still I chase my dream. And still I tell you a hunting story where I bring you the reality of an Illinois archery season for the majestic, wily, beautiful white-tailed deer. I am a storyteller, not a shaman, and so you never truly know what may happen on a hunt until you've been there and lived it and found out for yourself. And so, braving the temperature, dancing just above zero, with a perfect wind and an absolutely perfect ambush, I was set up next to the cattail pond. I was below the dish, so topographically I would be invisible and brushed in. Everything would be so absolutely perfect if a deer would take this trail to my left side. All I would need to do was remove my hands from my muff, turn on the cameras, lift my bow, and send a shaft at less than 10 yards, speeding through the animal's heart and lungs. Everything was so absolutely perfect. The rabbits rustled in the underbrush. The wind was in my face. It was only missing one key ingredient. I don't know what excuses or explanations I can offer you. I am unable to simply produce deer at my command. And a cruel joke of divinity would be to send a spike buck down my trail to taunt me, because I am unwilling to compromise my ethics. I will not, if I can avoid it, kill unmature bucks. And I am unwilling to compromise my ethics and simply sling arrows at animals if I cannot kill with impunity. I do business up close and personal, and I am more than willing to suffer the disgrace of empty seasons in order to do things according to my own moral compass with a clean conscience. So crucify me and then burn me to ashes in the cyber campfire of the internet. This is my hunt. This is my hunting story. This hunt came to an end with the last of shooting light. I am not a morning person, not at all. Tossing, turning, staring at the blackness of my ceiling, daydreaming and trying to fall asleep, picturing hunting scenarios in my head. You see, that black night just before the frozen winter's dawn, that is where all a hunter's dreams are possible. And then the sun comes up and the snow comes down, melting on my cameras, freezing almost solid, my fletching frosting from my breath, the wind perfect for my triangular ambush. I was set up on the ground on the opposite oak saddle on another deadfall in my camp chair. Everything was so absolutely perfect. Cardinals and other winter birds rustling in the frozen leaves, squirrels chattering and rustling in the frost-covered branches, sending my nerves on edge. Rabbits playing around in the deadfall behind me, watching, waiting, listening, enduring the savage, desolate beauty of the elements, because nature does not care. Everything was so perfect. You never truly know what will happen on a hunt. And so, my quest goes on. My hunting story goes on. The sun rose higher and higher, and the temperature stayed much the same as I battled the elements to keep my camera gear functioning. And there is a strange, vain hope on the morning hunt. Because truly, when you sit in the frozen darkness, anything is possible when that sun starts to come up. hoping that deer would leave their beds and cross the funnel between the ravines. 3 distinct things are going to happen if a deer goes down to my arrow. First, I'm going to cry, and then I'm going to thank God, and then I'm going to eat its heart. But the mundane vagaries and responsibilities of modern life call me away from this primal, beautiful, desolate solitude. And still, the quest goes on, chasing the ghost of a dream. There is much prestige and great pleasure in hunting a wild and free animal in fair chase, where it has no constraints on its movements, and it goes about its daily life with its inborn instincts to avoid predation. There is also much frustration, because a wild and free, majestic creature has no obligation to make itself apparent to you. You have to learn where they want to be, when they are going to be there, and be there to intercept them. Watching, waiting, listening, and such is the visceral mystery that is the hunt. Without trail cameras, my season had become a bit more complicated. But luckily, the snowfall had proven useful in at least tracking fresh animal movement. Fur-bearing animals were many in this timber, and yet there was a fresh deer track that came in front of and circled around my area in the time that I had not been here. Enduring the cold, as always at this time of year, watching, waiting, listening, feeling my fingers burn within the muff, hoping and praying that the deer would come from the bedding area opposite to my stand and take its trail that it had gone in on. But wild and free creatures taken in fair chase have no obligation to you, the hunter. And so it had gone about its daily life completely irregardless of my prayers and desires. And such is the nature of fair chase hunting, the visceral mystery. Where have all the deer gone? Fair chase hunting on free-range animals is naturally unpredictable, and such is the appeal of hunting. Santiago fished for 84 days without catching a fish, and so I was back in the woods in my hilltop ambush, watching, waiting, listening. Every day of hunting is exactly the same, but every day of hunting is just a little bit different. The same primal emotions and sensations of our ancestors, but different sights, different sounds, different smells. Watching across the ravine, I saw the cattle moving in their pasture, and then my heart was filled with excitement and my body flushed with adrenaline as I saw movement. A buck was walking the bottom of the ravine in front of me, directly in front of me, walking across the frozen small stream. I used my can call to try to get his attention, but it was to no avail. You cannot control wild and free, majestic creatures no matter how hard you would try. And so he simply walked up the opposite side of the ridge, jumped the fence in with the cattle, and began licking away on their salt block. Now you see, salt and bait are illegal in Illinois. And honestly, I don't know if I would bother to use them if they were, because I am a slave to my own moral compass and my hunting ethics. But yet, I watched him until the last of light as he stood perfectly safe in the wide open. The sun comes up on an empty woods, washing away the phantasmagoria and washing away a hunter's dreams, because anything is truly possible in the darkness. You never truly know what will happen on a hunt until you've been there. Fighting the omnipresent feeling that this season was yet another failure, I remained watching, waiting, and listening. Ironically enough, we had had a couple of warm days. Warm days in the sense of above 32 degrees, so relatively speaking, 33 is warm. And so the snow had melted. The woods were an absolute muddy mess when I had hiked into them. Hoping, praying, squirrels rattling the tree limbs above my head, set up in my deadfall with fresh deer tracks in the mud. The wind was so absolutely perfect. Everything was so absolutely perfect. As always, the perfect ambush. Watching, waiting, listening, hoping that the law of averages would bring a deer that I am willing to take within my range. The day moved on and the wind stayed steady, but I was forced to realize that the best part of the season had already passed. Sometimes the simplest things in the world can be extremely difficult to achieve. The perfect ambush with the perfect wind means absolutely nothing if no animal shows up. You have to be there. You have to be there well in advance of the animal. The wind has to hold, and most importantly, the animal has to take your trail. Then you must execute a perfect shot, and an ethical shot. Hunting and religion are inexplicably linked. And just like with religion and in life, you don't always get what you want. And so, I keep the faith.
Hope you guys enjoyed watching. As always, God bless all my sportsmen of America. Join the Anti-Rated Spectacular Rides. Please check out my friends over at SOETacticalgear.com. Thank you very much to those of you involved in law enforcement and those of you serving in the military. Thanks for watching Tex Grebner Outdoors.